Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today for our webinar, Leveraging Enterprise Tools for a Native Apple Experience. We intend to talk about why the Apple experience is great for users, why it's a beautiful experience, and how you can actually use native Apple tools for the enterprise to secure and control corporate resources without interfering with that Apple experience. So I'm Jason Stanaland, Product Marketing Manager here at Jamf Software, and I'm joined by John Miller, Product Manager, and Tad Johnson, our Commercial Marketing Manager. So the presentation agenda today, we're going to frame up the conversation with an overview. We'll talk a little bit about deployment, security, and the app ecosystem. So in terms of an overview and framing up this conversation, I want to just kind of talk about end-user choice and why that's become important. There's been some trends that have emerged in business that we all, I'm sure, know and love. The bring your own device trend and choice trends within businesses that are giving the users the choices of what devices and technologies they want to bring into the workplace and giving them a choice of how they want to use them. Gartner is also predicting that this trend will continue. They predict that by 2017, half of the organizations out there will be requiring employees to bring their own devices to work. And technology trends are also following suit to create a more choice-driven environment, and that they are much more intuitive and they're much more personalized as technology progresses. We're seeing those trends. And these changes are creating a new type of end users. These end users are much more self-sufficient, and they expect not just technology to work, they expect it to work all of the time, and more importantly, they expect it to work the way that they want it to work. It's empowering them, the technology is, and also the choice programs are empowering our end users, and it's helping them to feel more like they have more autonomy and they have more control. And it's also causing end users to get much more involved in technology and to get involved in technology decisions. And this is leading to new types of IT within organizations that are emerging. Many different types of ITs in different organizations. A few of these types of IT come in the form of shadow IT and collaborative IT. And I'm going to refer to the other gentleman in the room here to address some of these.
Yeah, so thanks, Jason. Hey, this is Tad. So we've heard from customers and from experience as well. One of the trends we've seen lately is kind of the rise of what we call shadow IT. And the idea here is that if you have an organization where, say it's the marketing department or maybe the sales department, where they want to do a new IT initiative, right? They want to equip their sales staff with iPads, for example. It's a common thing we see. It's not always the case that they're going to go through the quote-unquote proper channels of requesting that through the IT department. And instead, what you might find is you have someone like a sales manager, a marketing manager, maybe the office manager, who's taking on the additional responsibility of kind of taking care of that iPad rollout. Now, this can be a good thing. It can be a good thing if that means that there's the appropriate technology in the hands of employees. But I think it also represents a bit of a challenge or a bit of a risk, because oftentimes those other IT groups don't always have the same organizational view of security issues. They might not be well in sync with some of the other policies that are in play. And so there's a little bit of a risk here if more and more shadow IT groups spring up in an organization, that you have duplications of effort or you have inconsistencies across the organization when it comes to technology.
Yeah, that's an interesting thing that you bring up, Ted. And this is John Miller, but just kind of on that idea, it seems like it's more people that are using the technology to they have the access to that, and they want to be able to utilize that for their specific job needs right away and more quickly. And so then it kind of becomes, I think this is what you're saying, where how do we listen to all those different groups? Is that kind of what you're saying? We're in that shadow IT world. The IT understands that there are these different groups, but then how do we leverage those different things together?
Right, yeah. Anytime, if you're in an organization where this is happening, that suggests that there is maybe an unmet need or that there may be needs that could be met in a new way. And so I think it's a good opportunity for IT to get back in front of those groups and figure out how they can apply new technologies or new processes to meet that.
Yeah, one of the places that I've seen this actually, that same idea is when you look at an education space, and in education meaning a K through 12 and even some higher ed as well, and for the places outside of the U.S., that primary school where the teachers themselves are kind of those department heads, where they have an understanding for what their students need, or they have an understanding for what the departments themselves need, and they're able to respond very quickly and depend on the individuals that use and consume the technology to understand what to do with that. And so then it becomes this kind of, how do we not only shadow what IT is able to provide, but do that in a collaborative manner, where I understand this is, from an IT perspective, these are the needs of my users, and there's some infrastructure things that we can help enable them with. But it's really helpful, and it's kind of a freeing thing from an IT standpoint. I think a lot of IT organizations are a little bit concerned, but it's exciting on the opposite side, because IT doesn't have to worry about that. They have a greater dependency that the end users kind of know what they're doing, and that's really exciting and really cool stuff that we're able to see on what we have in this.
And I think the other thing to point out is we're seeing a lot of IT groups also move toward a service-oriented approach to delivering IT services. So they're acting as a partner to the business. They're providing services to the business, and it makes a lot more sense to sort of work within business functions and work with business functions to deliver the services. So next, let's move along to talking about deployment a little bit. I want to start by talking about simplicity, and first I'm going to say kind of some things about the inverse of simplicity. What is complexity, and what does that mean to a business? It equates to cost and risk. For the end user, it equates to confusion and frustration. And so, simplicity is really important, especially when you're deploying a new technology. With new deployment, it's kind of like a first impression. It's the first thing the end user is going to see, and you want them to have a good experience. You want to automate as much as you can, and you want to remove as many barriers as you possibly can. So there's this old school, 10-year-old, I think, rule that was came out of a study called it was kind of like the 3-click rule. And that was if you had more than 3 clicks in a sequential step process, it was too many. Users wouldn't go past that 3-click barrier. Nowadays, studies are proving that users, to get something that they want, will go as far as clicking beyond 10 clicks, up to 12 clicks, or taps, if you will, on a smart device. But when you're looking at technology that's like security oriented or oriented toward management, it's a little bit more potentially for the end user in some cases as an imposition as it is as an incentive. So it's also important to look at the user interface and building in things into the interface for the user that helps them to make choices about what they want and define their preferences through the deployment and setup process. And so you can kind of make it a little bit more about the user as much as it is about the technology. And Apple does this really well with some of their solutions. They simplify things. They take away the quote unquote number of clicks with programs like the device enrollment program, which we'll talk about a little more in a minute, and also just their standard setup. They're allowing you with a new device that you pull out of the box to set up the technology for yourself and also make some decisions about your own preferences as you do that. So that's empowering the end user. And let's talk a little bit more about that as well.
Yeah. Thanks, Jason. I think that so I've done a number of workshops with customers on how to do imaging, how to do deployment, and not too long ago, I think it was pretty common to do kind of a one-size-fits-all deployment model. You get a new Mac, you get a new PC, you wipe the drive, you lay down the image, right? It was often kind of the monolithic image, and now, especially with iPad and iPhone, but also with Mac and with more modern PC models, you can do a lot more in the deployment phase related to the user choice or the user empowerment, where instead of saying, I, as an IT admin, I know what everyone needs, and so I'll give them just what they need. It's a lot easier if you can provide that as a choice to a user, saying, here's the catalog of software we offer, here's the catalog of configurations we offer, and allowing you to kind of put together the tools that you need to use. Now that we're in an era where I would say most workers who are joining the knowledge worker industry are pretty familiar with basic computer technology, pretty familiar. They've probably done this on their own. They might have a smartphone or a tablet already at home, and so you can present that as more of an option and really stay in line with the experience that they're used to, rather than creating a new parallel experience involving that monolithic image. And John, you were going to show us kind of an example of this, of what this might look like.
Yeah, I want to show a little bit, and this was going to be using my iPad. So we're going to go ahead and switch over and show my iPad here that we have. My iPad is here on the right-hand side, and we've got the JSS on the left-hand side there for you. And really what we want to show is this user empowerment and what this means for an end user. And so here you can see I have my device, and it's got all the apps and things that I've had and used this device. And whether this is a BYO type of deployment where I bring my own device, or this is something where we're actually doing the initial deployment, the nice thing that we can do in this user empowerment and what this gains, we can depend on our users to have an understanding of the technology. And so this is the enrollment for my device, and I can have all my users actually go through the enrollment themselves. And so if I wanted to, I could say, okay, I'm going to have all my users go through the enrollment by just getting them this URL. They can go ahead and log in. And previously, with other kind of the IT type infrastructure and those steps that Tad talked about before, where imaging was a process, it's really not necessarily something that is very foreign to users. They have an idea of doing some setup and configuration of their own devices. And so walking through a process like this isn't something that's very scary or new or different. It's something that they're used to and understand. On the backside, we can use the JSS and the Casper suite to actually do some setup to say, once you've gone through that, a lot of things are going to happen automatically for those users. And so we can automatically configure the devices to become managed devices. They're going to enroll, and you can see here now that we have self-service install automatically on the device. And then anything that we've set up for the device from a policy standpoint, to do passcode requirements, to do app deployments, to do all kinds of different things can just automatically happen for those devices. And it really makes for a great user experience to be able to, along that line of user empowerment, actually use their devices how they want to use them. And you can see there's apps that we've made available that are installing. We've got ebooks that are here that those end users can receive and kind of get from the organization. Whatever the organization needs to provide, they can provide that in an easy way. Well, for the end users, they're still able to use everything that they have. Now that I see that my enrollment is complete, the organization has an IT policy where I need to have a passcode. So I can say, okay, I'll set that passcode, and I'm just going to use 1, 2, 3, 4 here just for example's sake.
And we should mention this is not movie magic. This is really a real-time, real-life example of how this experience might look for your organization.
Right,
so
right.
John just did this in, about a minute and a half?
Exactly. And so it's a really great thing for me as an end user within that organization to be able to make these steps and make these decisions on my own and not necessarily be given something that forces me to use only individual things. I can use the things that I'm comfortable with and the tools that I'm familiar with.
Yeah, and I think that also to highlight this, something else or another dynamic here is that we just showed how easy it can be for an end user, but it's also much easier for IT to give the user the ability to configure these things on their own. And when they pull a device out of the box, it doesn't take a car ride over or a walk over to their office to sit down with them for hours and configure the device. You can know that they're safe and happy and they're getting all the productivity tools that they need. So let's shift gears a little bit and talk about security. And I want to talk about transparency when it pertains to security and the user experience a little bit. But first, I'd also like to kind of flip that and say, I want to talk about what invisible security looks like. And so I think it's important when you're implementing management and security tools to sort of remain kind of in the background and be invisible. And I use a term non-invasive internally here. That's definitely not an industry term. Tad here has told me it's a surgery term, but it's an analogy here in that when a surgeon goes in and does non-invasive surgery, they go in and they take care of the problem and they don't disturb anything else inside the body when they're doing that. And it's the same thing here. When you implement security and management, you want to go in, you want to operate on the things that you need to, fix the problems you need to, patch the security things that you need to patch, and not interfere with the end user experience. You don't want to interfere with the natural experience on the device. You don't want to interfere with their workflows, especially if it's a choice environment or a BYOD environment. If you put like a container on the device or you put something that's really invasive to the end user experience, you're actually taking that choice away from them. They chose that platform for a reason, and you want to make sure that they're able to sort of celebrate the benefits of the platform that they choose. And Apple provides great tools for us to do that, which we'll talk about in a minute. On the flip side, if you're being non-invasive or you're being kind of invisible with your security approach on the device, you also want to make sure that you're sort of dealing with user concerns pertaining to sort of the man behind the curtain, right? So you want to be as transparent as possible, making sure the end user knows exactly what you're doing and why. And you can deal with this with technology by kind of notifying the user or alerting the user when you make changes on their device and having them accept those changes. And you can also do it with policy. So if you have a security policy or a BYOD policy, it might be a good idea to have a policy that kind of mirrors that, that's written from the perspective of the end user. It could be something like a privacy policy or a user protection policy or a trust policy or something like that, where you're actually writing a document that talks about the end user's needs and what you're doing in terms of security. So let's talk a little bit about how we can do all of that and cater to end users' needs while ensuring that we're meeting best practice standards.
Yeah, so we've talked a lot about security in the context of how to use the built-in Apple security frameworks. Apple's done a really nice job over the last, let's say 3, 4, 5 years of adding in real enterprise-grade security capabilities to their tools without making it complex and without adding any additional layers or any distractions from the user experience. One of the great examples of that is the File Vault 2 disk encryption system. So before File Vault was built into the OS, a lot of organizations wanted to implement disk encryption to ensure that if a laptop went missing, that they weren't going to lose sensitive data. And it was often a real challenge because that meant installing a third-party disk encryption tool that made every future update a lot more difficult. It made the user login experience a lot more difficult. It just wasn't a great user experience, and it was complex for IT. Right. Now that File Vault is built into the OS, every time you run an update, that's also you're updating your File Vault along with that. The user login process is really simple, and so it's presenting a really easy example. I think that related to this is kind of the idea of be careful of unintended consequences and be careful of where the path of least resistance might lead. I just talked to another group last week, and we were talking about security, and the example was, you can have a really great security policy, and you can make sure that you are restricting all of the potentially dangerous places that someone might go. But if you make it an excessive burden where someone is really having a hard time just getting their job done, then you might discover that they are now going to take other means to share a file. Instead of using the approved file sharing process, they might install Dropbox, or they might start using their personal email, or they might bring a non-authorized device into your environment. So that's where I think these two ideas really fit together well. Using the Apple native security controls means that you're providing the same native Apple experience, and it means that you're not putting a big burden on users, so you're not very likely to have that consequence of the unintended consequence or the path of least resistance, where someone's going outside of the walled garden in order to get their work done. John, I think you would.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we've been looking at and I actually want to show and talk a little bit about is around that idea. And sometimes it's hard to map what's this technology that's available and what does that actually mean for me. So if you could actually flip back over, Tad, we want to show a little bit of what's in the JSS here. And so this is my device, and what we have in the JSS is this configuration profile. And again, this is all using Apple's native technology, things that they've made available. And what they have is a built-in method that is going to allow the device itself to control and ensure security of corporate data. And a lot of buzzwords are in that, but basically what we have here on the screen on the left is you can see it says allow unmanaged apps to open managed data and vice versa. And what that means is basically I want to set up my corporate garden. And so on my iPad here, I'm going to flip back over, and you can see kind of in the lower right-hand side those apps that we've deployed, Box, Okta, Sketch, apps that we use relatively regularly at Jamf Software at least, and these were deployed as managed apps, which for all intents and purposes means these are corporately provided apps, or apps that the school purchased through VPP, assigned them to the users, and got those deployed. But what that means for an end user and what that means for IT is we're able to settle both of those kind of differences. And Tad, when you were talking, you were kind of talking about that idea of, well, what if a user has something that they're familiar with or that they're comfortable with? It's an app that they like and they appreciate. We can actually let Apple do the things that it does best in providing this technology in the operating system to provide both that user experience that they like, but secure that data. And what we're going to show here is, let's say I'm on the road and what we have is these different apps and I've got a bunch of different stuff, but Tad and I work together in a lot of different things, and he calls and says, I'm going to need a piece of content that you have on your device. Maybe it's something that we have for Jamf Nation, or maybe it's just a picture of the car that I want to buy someday. Whatever it is that we want to have, we can go ahead and I'm going to grab that right here from my personal computer. And it's this 1938 Alfa Romeo, which, again, for all intents and purposes, this is just an example. But this can be any piece of content that you have on your device, wherever that is. CrashPlan Pro is an unmanaged app, and I'm going to go ahead and I want to share this with Tad within our kind of corporate space. And so I can go here into the Open In, and you can see all the different apps that are here. But one of those is Box, which is our corporate, content. So Tad and I have this space under my personal workspace on our Box share that we share a lot of different content. You can see there's a backup of a database that him and I were working on. There's our terms and conditions for hosting, and that's a draft that him and I are going back and forth on. But we really need to get the picture of this 1938 Alfa Romeo to work on something very important. And so I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to upload that. And that's going to upload. We're going to retry that again, make sure we got our internet here. But what this will do is actually put that share on, or that piece of content onto that share. And so here I can go into my workspace, I can go into For Tad. You can see the different things that we have. And the Alfa Romeo picture didn't make it up there, but we can go ahead and look at the other content that's there. And the important thing to think about is I just took a piece of content, something that was familiar for me out of the app, and moved that into the corporate garden. But we're more worried about things coming out of the corporate garden than into the garden. And so what we can see is that I've got this different content, and I want to take this terms and conditions for hosting, and I want to share this with Tad over something other than our corporate environment. And so I'm going to go through the Open In, and you can see here that the only app that shows up is Sketch. And this is, again, one of those managed apps that we have. So the OS understands this is the file type that I'm looking at. This is what the user wants to do. They want to open it, but I have this policy where they can't bring that into non-corporate space. And so using the native built-in technology, we're able to set up rumble strips, if you will, to allow things to come into the corporate garden, but not out of the corporate garden, and have all that displayed on a native experience for that end user. So now I can open that in Sketch, do whatever we need to in that, and it's not using a special app. It's not using anything different than what that end user uses. They can use the technology they're familiar with, the apps they already have, to bring that data in and not compromise the security of that information.
And John, without getting too technical here, the way that iOS is implemented with the secure data store for each app and the app sandbox, that's actually a very secure solution. So
yeah,
even though
absolutely.
What we're looking at here is the user experience, but even if somehow there was a nefarious actor that was trying to hack this device, all that data is encrypted, and there's no real way other than what we just saw there for one app to the data to leak from one app into another.
Right, exactly. We inherit all of those that technology and those great things that are built in to secure the data that's just at rest in the device. We can secure who can get access to what data using our, the functions that we've been using already, and then we can also secure where we put that content and how it can get to different places, all using that built-in technology. I think this is a really great experience for the user. Instead of providing a new app or saying this is how you have to do when you do work stuff, go in this. Again, this is just iOS, so I can move these things into different things like, hey, Sketch is really a productivity thing for me. Box is really important, so I'm going to put that right on my front page so that I always have access to that. And we can break up that corporate garden however we want. On the flip side, the other thing that's really exciting about this is we're also able to remove that data. And so when the end user moves to a different department, or if they leave the organization, if they're a student and they graduate, which is a very positive way to leave the organization, we can go ahead and just remove and unmanage that device. And so if we go ahead and search, we can find my device here. And if we go into the management, there's all the different commands that we have. And what we want to do is just mark the device and say unmanage. And what this is going to do is say, hey, this is no longer a device that's within our inventory. And what we'll see is it's going to send the command, the apps are going to disappear, that the self-service itself went away, and all this is now that corporate data, that access to the data. You can see Box is gone, Okta's gone, and Sketch is also gone. And so it secures that data from end to end and lets that user use the things that they're comfortable and familiar with.
Nice.
Yeah, I think Apple has done a great job, securing data at rest with the encryption, with the managed open-end, and they also have things like app-level VPN that you can easily, utilize to secure data, no matter where it's traversing, whether it's traversing from app to app within the iOS environment or on a Mac, or whether it's traversing back and forth between a device and your infrastructure. So, really great stuff. So let's move along to talking about the app ecosystem. And first, I want to talk a little bit about distribution and discovery. I did a webinar a couple weeks ago, and I made the comment that I think the App Store is one of the largest business portfolios in technology history. I think one could argue that the web out there is one of those tool sets, and the App Store is as well. I mean, there's just so many great apps out there. There's really almost like an app abyss. There's hundreds of thousands of great productivity apps. It's difficult sometimes, though, for users to find the right apps for them. I think there's like an 80-20 rule, really, with technology adoption generally. You have about 20% of the people out there actively searching for technology and finding the right tools for them. That other 80%, though, is kind of lagging, and they're kind of struggling to find the right tools. Maybe they don't know how to use the tools. I saw a statistic that 22% of the applications that are downloaded from the App Store are only used once. They're never used more than once. So that's sort of a statistic that alludes to just lack of education and just not finding the right apps. And so IT can help with that. And IT has the right data. They have the right tools. With tools like the Casper Suite, they can go in and see how applications are being used. They can push applications to specific people in the organization that are supported, and the best applications for your environment, for the corporate or organization or school. And they can push apps specific to the department or role or an individual's specific needs. They can also manage how apps are paid for and things like that. Let's talk a little bit about VPP and self-service and how we can use those tools to manage what applications end users get and make sure they get the right tools for the job.
Yeah, absolutely. And VPP and the volume purchase program is I think something that was a huge leap forward in that ecosystem to not only be able to provide the apps through that purchasing and buy things in volume to support a vendor in mass and be able to do that in a cost-effective way. But the new changes with managed app distribution to be able to reclaim those licenses or reassign those apps to the new users as they move in and out and go from group to group or whatever the case may be. I think a lot of education systems are super excited about this. I know that they have been looking for something like this to, fifth graders move into sixth grade or primary school go on to secondary school. But it's just as applicable in the corporate space where, even here at Jamf, we have how many different apps for marketing or different apps for product management. Development has a different set of needs, and so we can provide that content, the access to those tools, using something like the volume purchase program and have that all be automatic where they have that, it just shows up, it's available to them on the devices. They can get that however they want to, leveraging the exact same stuff we just talked about. You kind of get the feeling of this being a snowball that keeps building on itself where it's not only the great user experience, but then it's also very safe for the organization. And we also can let the end users dive into that ecosystem, use that stuff. We can provide through VPP access to whatever tool they need, and we can really extend what's available in the framework to make it really nice. It's a hard thing to think about what are the improvements that we can make that's there, but it's really more improvements for IT to be able to deliver that tech in that shadow IT collaborative way using what Apple's given us with the volume purchase program.
So one way to take advantage of all of this is with our self-service tool. Self-service is a collection point to tie all of these concepts together, such as deploying apps, whether they're third-party or in-house apps, and leveraging the volume purchasing program as well. So let's take a look at self-service. Self-service is a way to present a catalog of options to your users rather than having everything come through IT. So the user can actually go in and download or install applications. They can be installed by category or available to the user by category based upon their department or role. You can also, in some cases, install potentially volume purchasing or request volume purchasing tokens like we have here. And you maybe even install a printer, for example. So these are a lot of tasks that are commonly done by IT departments. In the past, maybe the IT admin had to go to the computer to elevate the privilege or to just because they didn't have the user didn't have the technical capability to do this, and now they can just do it right from self-service. They also have the ability to access any kind of internal content right from self-service, such as we have here, access to IT help in this case for Jamf, box.com, and the Jamf wikis. They can click there and gain access to any kind of web-based content. And this self-service here that you see on the screen is actually what we use here at Jamf internally. So it's a real-world example of how self-service is used. And with self-service, the cool thing is the user doesn't really have to know how their Mac works. They certainly don't have to be an admin on their Mac to make this magic happen. It's been a very popular and positive feature here for us at Jamf, a very, very great feature of the Casper suite, and it allows IT to save costs and time by creating more self-sufficient and productive end users.
So if you guys are interested in learning more about self-service, we do have some nice videos up on our website. We've done another webinar, really diving deep into the self-service on its own.
So with that, we'd like to thank you all for joining us. Please feel free to share the link out once we make it available to other people within your organization that might be interested, and reach out to us if you have any questions. Everyone have a great day.